Imagine trusting someone with the biggest secret of your life, only for them to expose it to the very people who once abandoned you. That's what happened to me. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Evan Carter, and for most of my life, I learned to survive by keeping my head down. I wasn't born into money. I wasn't given anything. In fact, my parents pushed me out when I turned 18, told me I needed to figure life out on my own, and never looked back. I worked whatever jobs I could find. Sometimes I slept in my car. Sometimes I skipped meals just to make it through the week. I learned not to expect help from anyone. Things only changed when I met the one person who believed in me. My mentor, a man who saw something in me when no one else cared. I worked for him for years, stayed loyal, and never imagined he would one day leave everything he owned in my hands. When he passed, I inherited more than I ever dreamed possible. $13 billion. A number so big it didn't even feel real. And maybe that's why I stayed quiet about it. I didn't want to attract attention, and I definitely didn't want my past to come crawling back. That's also why I hid it from Maya. She came into my life at a time when I was lonely but cautious. She was warm, funny, and never seemed interested in anything except knowing me. I didn't want to scare her away with the truth. I didn't want her to treat me differently. So I lived simply, old truck, small apartment, basic clothes. She loved that about me. Or at least she said she did. As months passed, I started trusting her. She was there on the days when my thoughts felt heavy. She listened when I talked about my past. She held my hand through moments I didn't know I still needed comfort for. For the first time in years, I felt safe enough to imagine a future with someone. And that's when I made the mistake that changed everything. One quiet night, sitting on the couch with her head on my shoulder, I let my guard down. I told her the truth. I told her what my mentor had left me. I told her why I kept it hidden. I admitted how scared I was that people would only see the money and not me. She looked shocked, of course, but she hugged me and said she understood. Said she would never betray me. Said I could trust her completely. I believed her. I let myself breathe for the first time in years, thinking maybe love didn't always come with pain. I didn't know then that the moment those words left my mouth, everything in my life had already begun to fall apart. After I told Maya the truth, things felt different, though I tried hard not to see it at first. She didn't act excited or overwhelmed the way I expected. Instead, she became quiet, almost too quiet. At first, I thought she just needed time to process what I had told her. Anyone would. But the change didn't go away. It grew. She started watching me in a way she never had before, like she was studying me. When I came home from work, she would jump into questions that made my stomach twist. She asked about my childhood again, but this time the questions were sharper, more direct. What my parents were like, where they were now, how long it had been since we talked, what exactly happened between us. She had never cared much before, but suddenly she needed every detail. Then she moved to questions I had never expected from her. She asked where I kept the papers for the inheritance. She wanted to know the name of the lawyer who managed everything. She wondered why I still lived so simply and why I didn't act rich. She even asked if anyone else knew about the money or if I had told anyone besides her. She claimed she was just curious, but something about her voice felt different, like she wasn't asking to understand me, but to understand the money. I tried not to think the worst. I told myself she was just trying to make sense of the situation. Maybe she felt insecure. Maybe she wanted reassurance. I kept giving her excuses in my head, because the alternative scared me too much. I didn't want to believe that the one person I trusted had started to see me differently. I didn't want to believe she saw a number instead of a man. But the distance became clearer each day. She wasn't as gentle with me. She stopped laughing the way she used to. She spent more time on her phone, turning the screen away when I walked by, ending calls quickly, acting like she had nothing to hide. When I asked if everything was okay, she smiled and said she was fine, but her eyes told a different story. She looked at me like she was searching for something, waiting for me to slip up and give her more information. The worst part was that a part of me noticed all of it. I felt the shift in her energy, the way she talked to me, the way she suddenly cared about things she never once asked about in the past. I felt it, but I pushed it down. I kept telling myself I was imagining things. I loved her, and love can make even a cautious man blind. I convinced myself she was still the same woman I had fallen for. That she wasn't like my parents. That she wouldn't use me. I wanted so badly to believe she was different that I ignored the truth staring right at me. I didn't know it then, but the betrayal had already begun long before I allowed myself to see it. The day everything fell apart started like any other. I had gone out to run a few errands, thinking about dinner and hoping Maya's strange behavior would settle on its own. I wanted things to go back to the way they were before I opened my mouth and trusted her with something I had protected for years. I didn't know that while I was out, my life was already being rearranged without me. When I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I froze. Two people I never expected to see again were sitting in my living room like they owned the place. My parents, Philip and Linda Carter. The same people who shut the door on me when I needed them the most. The same people who told me I wasn't their responsibility the moment I turned 18. They were sitting on my couch, relaxed, smiling, acting like they had been invited. My breath caught in my chest. For a moment, I thought maybe I was dreaming or going crazy. They hadn't reached out in years. Not a call. Not a text. Not a single attempt to check on whether I was alive or dead. Yet here they were, legs crossed, holding cups of coffee like they were visiting an old friend. Maya was standing beside them. She gave me a smile that wasn't full of love or nervousness. It was proud. Almost satisfied. I didn't need her to explain anything. My parents being in my house told me everything I needed to know. My mother stood up first, walking toward me with arms open, as if we were the closest family in the world. "Evan," she said softly, "we've missed you so much." Miss me? These were the same people who watched me struggle and never cared. I didn't move. I didn't hug her back. I couldn't. My father didn't even wait for a greeting. He looked me up and down and said, "You should have told us sooner. Family deserves to know something this big." My stomach dropped. Maya's eyes met mine, and she didn't even look sorry. She looked excited, like she had done something good. I finally asked her, "What did you do?" She didn't hesitate. She told me she had reached out to them after thinking long and hard. She said she felt it was wrong, that I kept my inheritance a secret from my own parents. According to her, they deserved a chance to reconnect with me now that life had changed. But the truth was written all over the room. She hadn't done it because she cared about my family. She did it because she cared about the money. And so did they. My parents sat there with the same greedy look I remembered from childhood, but sharper, like they were already planning what they wanted from me. They talked about how happy they were that I had finally made something of myself, as if I had become valuable only because of the billions attached to my name. I felt something inside me crack. Not just anger. Not just disappointment. It was the pain of realizing the one person I trusted had opened the door for the two people I never wanted in my life again. They smiled at me like they owned me. And all I could do was stand there and feel the world I built crumble under my feet. As soon as the shock of seeing them settled, my parents dropped whatever act they were pretending to play. Philip leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees like he was about to discuss a business deal, not the life of the son he'd abandoned. He didn't bother easing into it. He went straight to the point, straight to the money. He said they had talked things over with Maya and decided that the fairest way to move forward was for the family to receive a share of the $13 billion. He used the word family so casually, like it meant something now after years of silence. He didn't ask how I had been, where I had lived, what struggles I went through, or even how I felt about them suddenly walking back into my life. None of that mattered to him. All he cared about was the number. My mother nodded, smiling like this was some warm reunion. She started listing all the things they deserved because they had raised me, ignoring the fact that they pushed me out the moment things got difficult. She talked about the sacrifices they supposedly made, the money they spent when I was a child, the roof they provided. It sounded like she had been waiting years to turn basic parenting into a bill she could cash out. I reminded them, they left me alone when I needed them most. They acted like I didn't exist. But they brushed my words away like they were dust on their sleeves. My father even said, "That's in the past. This is about the future now." And by future, he meant the kind he could only imagine with billions of dollars involved. Maya stood beside them as if she belonged there. Not beside me. Beside them. She didn't look guilty or conflicted. She looked proud of herself, like she had fixed some injustice by bringing them back into my life. She said she thought I needed closure, and that I should be grateful she reunited us. But her eyes kept drifting to the documents she assumed my parents would now have access to. She wasn't trying to help me. She was helping herself, trying to climb onto whatever she thought she had unlocked. As they talked over me, I felt something cold settle inside my chest. It wasn't just anger. It was realization. Maya wasn't the woman I thought she was, and my parents were exactly who they always had been: selfish, calculating, and ready to drain anyone if it benefited them. They acted like the three of them had formed a team, and I was just the prize they were about to split. I listened to them make plans for money they hadn't earned, for a life they had no right to, and for a future they thought I was obligated to provide. They treated me like a tool, not a son, not a partner, not a human being. In that moment, standing in my own living room surrounded by people who were supposed to care about me, I understood something I never wanted to believe. I had been betrayed by the only two groups of people I had ever tried to trust: the girlfriend I let into my heart and the parents I once hoped would love me. And the worst part was realizing none of them even saw the betrayal. All they saw was the money. When their demands became too much to listen to, something inside me shut down. I couldn't argue anymore. I couldn't explain myself. I couldn't pretend that any of them cared about me. My voice came out flat when I finally said, "All of you need to leave." I wasn't loud. I wasn't angry. I was done. But they didn't move. My father smirked like I was being dramatic. My mother told me to calm down and think reasonably. Maya crossed her arms and said I was overreacting, and that we should talk like adults. They acted as if my home was theirs already, like my invitation, or refusal, didn't matter. To them, I was still the soft, quiet person who would let things slide. But I didn't have the strength to keep arguing. So I walked past them, went to my room, and closed the door. I heard them whispering in the living room, confident I would eventually come out and give them what they wanted. They thought silence meant weakness. They thought I was the same boy they once pushed aside. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, feeling numb at first, then angry, then tired of being tired. My mind drifted back to memories I hadn't touched in years. The night my parents told me to pack my things. The cold morning when I slept in my car for the first time. The days when I ate whatever cheap scraps I could afford. The moments I felt invisible, unwanted, and completely alone. But then I remembered something else. The one person who saw worth in me when everyone else saw nothing. My mentor. The man who gave me a job when no one else trusted me. The man who taught me how to work hard, how to stay honest, how to build a life that meant something. He believed in me when no one else did. He didn't look at me and see a burden. He saw potential. That memory grounded me more than anything. I thought about all the nights I stayed up working, all the mornings I pushed myself even when I felt defeated. I thought about every step I took to survive. None of that came from my parents. None of that came from Maya. Every bit of strength I had came from climbing out of the hole they left me in. As those memories washed over me, something inside me hardened. I realized I wasn't the weak kid they expected. I had survived too much, worked too hard, and built too much to let anyone use me again. I wasn't going to let my past walk back into my life and take what they had no part in creating. By the time the house finally went quiet and they left on their own, I knew exactly what I needed to do. I wasn't going to shout or argue. I wasn't going to beg anyone to understand me. I was going to protect myself the way I should have from the beginning. And in that quiet moment, I made a promise. This betrayal would not go unpunished. They had taken advantage of my trust for the last time. Now it was my turn to take back control. The next morning, when the house was finally silent and I knew no one would overhear me, I sat on the edge of my bed and called the one person who had always been connected to the truth of my inheritance, my mentor's attorney, Mr. Harlow. He had handled everything from the beginning and knew exactly how things were set up. My voice was steady when I told him what had happened, but inside I felt like I had been torn open. I didn't tell him every detail, just enough for him to understand the situation. He listened quietly, the way he always did, and then he explained something that eased a weight off my shoulders. My mentor had been a smart man. He knew how people changed around money, and he made sure the inheritance was protected in every possible way. The structure he put in place wasn't simple or flexible. It was built so that no one except me could touch it. Not a partner, not a spouse, not a parent, not even a future child until they reached adulthood. Everything was locked tightly under my name, untouchable without my direct permission. But what mattered most was something else Mr. Harlow said. Any attempt to manipulate me, pressure me, or force me into sharing the inheritance could be considered coercion. And coercion had consequences, legal ones. If my parents or Maya pushed too far, they could end up facing something they never expected. Hearing that didn't make me happy, but it gave me clarity. I finally understood that I wasn't standing defenseless in front of them. I had protection they didn't even know existed. For the first time since telling Maya the truth, I felt calm. I didn't need to yell, confront, or argue. I didn't need to explain myself to people who had already shown me who they were. I just needed to let them reveal their intentions fully. People like them didn't know how to hide greed for long. They always pushed harder, asked for more, and crossed lines without realizing what they were stepping into. So instead of shutting the door on them immediately, I made a different choice. I decided to let them keep going. I decided to let them believe they had the upper hand. I would listen. I would watch. I would let them think they were winning. The bigger their plans became, the more clearly their true motives would show, and the easier it would be to prove they weren't coming back for me, but for the money they imagined I owed them. It wasn't about revenge for the sake of hurting them. It was about protecting myself and finally refusing to be the quiet, scared person they thought they could walk all over. I had spent years fighting to survive without anyone's help. I wasn't about to let anyone take advantage of the life I had built. Let them talk. Let them scheme. Let them dream about what they thought was now within reach. They had no idea that every step they took only brought them closer to the consequences waiting for them. Over the next few days, their true colors became impossible to ignore. Maya began dropping hints about sharing the money. She talked casually about joint accounts, splitting investments, and planning a life where we would be equal partners in every decision. At first, she framed it like she cared about fairness or trust, but it quickly became clear she wasn't asking for a partnership. She was demanding access. Her tone changed when I refused, as if I was being unreasonable for wanting to keep what was mine. My parents, of course, took it even further. They began showing up unannounced at my properties, inspecting rooms, asking about renovations, and expecting tours of places they had no right to see. They spoke about allowances and monthly budgets, as if I were their personal bank instead of their son. They mentioned vacations, trips abroad, even events and parties they wanted me to pay for. It was shocking how casually they treated me like a wallet instead of a human being. They acted like I existed only to fund the life they believed they deserved. I kept my composure. I didn't shout or confront them. Instead, I watched carefully. Every comment, every request, every sly look. They were all clues about their greed, their sense of entitlement, and how far they were willing to go. I noticed how their faces lit up when imagining the money as theirs, how they started arguing among themselves over who would get what, and how Maya smiled quietly every time they made a bold demand. It was like they didn't even realize how obvious they were being. While they plotted and schemed in plain sight, I quietly documented everything. Notes, recordings, small details of conversations. Every action they took that crossed the line. It wasn't easy staying calm, but I knew I had to. They were exposing themselves with every word, every expectation, every manipulation attempt. And every time they pushed, they built their own case for consequences they hadn't even imagined. I also stayed in close contact with Mr. Harlow, my mentor's attorney. He was already reviewing all the evidence I collected, preparing for the moment when it would be necessary to act. It was comforting to know that I had someone on my side who understood the law and could make sure none of their attempts could touch me. The more they pushed, the more obvious their intentions became, and the easier it would be to protect myself legally. It was painful to watch the people I once trusted show their true nature so clearly. Yet at the same time, there was a strange sense of control. I wasn't reacting impulsively. I wasn't being manipulated. I was letting them dig their own hole while staying completely safe and prepared. Their greed was exposing them, piece by piece, and I was ready to let it all unfold exactly as it had to. I decided it was time to act. I invited Maya and my parents to dinner, choosing a calm evening when I knew they would all show up. I greeted them warmly, even smiling and apologizing if I had misunderstood them before. I acted like I was ready to put the past behind us and share my wealth, just like they wanted. I could see the relief and excitement on their faces. They thought they had finally won. We sat around the dining table, and I listened as they casually talked about what they thought I should do first: accounts, trips, houses, allowances. I nodded politely, pretending to consider their ideas. Every word they said was like fuel to the plan I had already made. I stayed calm, letting them feel in control, letting them believe they had manipulated me completely. Then I changed the mood. I reached into my pocket and started playing the first recording. Their voices filled the room. Maya suggesting they push me, my parents talking about what they expected to take. I didn't say a word. I let them hear themselves. Their smiles faltered. Their eyes widened. They didn't recognize the sound of their own greed echoing back at them. I pulled out my phone and showed text messages where they discussed exactly what they wanted from me, making no effort to hide it. Then I handed over legal documents prepared by my attorney, proving that none of them had any right to the inheritance and that their constant pressure and manipulation could be considered coercion. Every document, every note, every recording made it impossible for them to argue. Just as panic started to show in their faces, Mr. Harlow entered the room. Calm, precise, and serious, he explained the legal consequences. He told them they had no claim to anything and that any further harassment or attempts to manipulate me would lead to serious legal action. Their expressions changed from disbelief to shock, then fear. They had counted on my silence, on my fear, on my compliance, and now it was slipping through their fingers. Maya tried to speak, tried to argue that she was only helping, but her words sounded empty against the evidence. My parents stammered, trying to find a loophole, but there wasn't one. Every step they had taken to gain access to the money had been documented, and now it worked against them. For the first time in years, I felt free. The tension in my chest that had weighed me down was gone. The people who tried to control me, betray me, and take what wasn't theirs were exposed and powerless. Karma had arrived quietly, without me having to lift a hand. I didn't need to yell, threaten, or beg for respect. I had simply stayed calm, let them reveal themselves, and waited for the law to make them face the truth. That night, I realized something important. The people who think they can manipulate and take advantage of others will always eventually face the consequences. And sometimes, the consequences are far greater than they ever imagined. After the dinner, the tension in the house was unbearable. Maya approached me first, her voice shaking as she tried to explain herself. She said she hadn't meant for things to go this far, that she only wanted to be part of my life, that she was sorry for betraying my trust. But I didn't want apologies. I didn't want excuses. I realized she had revealed the secret for her own gain, not mine, and there was no way to bring back the trust that had been broken. I made my decision calmly. I ended the relationship. I handed her an eviction notice, explaining that she no longer had the right to live in my home or be part of my life. I cut all ties, leaving no room for negotiation or reconciliation. Her face turned pale, shock replacing the false confidence she had carried for weeks. She stumbled over words that didn't matter, her voice barely audible. I didn't respond. I let her leave on her own, knowing she had lost everything she thought she could take from me. Then I turned my attention to my parents. With Mr. Harlow's guidance, I put legal measures in place to prevent them from approaching me, entering my property, or attempting any contact that could be considered harassment or extortion. Restraining orders and legal restrictions ensured they could not manipulate me or gain access to any part of the inheritance. For the first time in years, I felt a boundary that could not be crossed. Watching them react was almost surreal. My parents, who had once held all the power in their minds, suddenly looked small and powerless. They had imagined a life funded by my wealth, imagined control over decisions, imagined respect that they had never earned. But none of it mattered anymore. Their plans, their greed, their illusions crumbled instantly. I didn't need to gloat. I didn't need revenge. The law and their own actions had done all the work. Maya, my parents, and the life they tried to build around me evaporated. Every demand, every expectation, every sense of entitlement they had relied on was gone. They left defeated, humiliated, and powerless. They had counted on me being weak, on me letting them take advantage. But that weakness had been gone for years. I just hadn't realized how strong I had become until that night. For me, the weight lifted immediately. I no longer had to worry about manipulation, betrayal, or false loyalties. I could finally breathe and focus on the life I had fought to build. The people who once caused me pain were removed from my world, and I could move forward without fear or distraction. That night, I understood something clearly. Those who try to take what isn't theirs, who betray trust for personal gain, will face consequences sooner or later. The people I trusted least had pushed too far, and the result was total collapse. Their power over me was gone. Their access to my life and my fortune was gone. Their leverage had disappeared entirely, and I was free. After everything had settled, I finally had time to really think about what had happened. I realized something I had known deep down but hadn't fully accepted. Betrayal often comes from the people who think your kindness is weakness. Those who believe they can take without giving, who think trust is something to exploit, will eventually reveal themselves. That lesson had been harsh, but it was real, and it had shaped the way I would move forward. I spent the following weeks reflecting on my life and what mattered most. I had spent so much energy worrying about people who didn't deserve it, protecting myself from those who had betrayed me. But now, for the first time, I could focus on using what I had for something meaningful. I began planning ways to invest my fortune in causes that truly mattered, helping people in need, funding scholarships for students who didn't have the opportunities one had been given, supporting community projects that could change lives. I wanted to become the kind of person I had once needed in my own life, someone who could make a real difference without expecting anything in return. There was a strange sense of peace in knowing that the people who had tried to take advantage of me were gone from my life. Maya and my parents had both faced the consequences of their actions. Their greed had left them with nothing, no access, no control, no power. Watching them deal with the fallout without me needing to intervene was strangely satisfying. Not because I wanted revenge, but because justice had quietly, inevitably, done its work. As I focused on helping others and building a life that truly reflected my values, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I didn't have to carry the anger, the fear, or the frustration anymore. The freedom of living without manipulation or betrayal around me allowed me to breathe, to dream, and to take action in ways that actually mattered. My mentor's faith in me had never been misplaced. I finally felt strong enough to honor that belief, using the opportunities one had been given to create something meaningful for others. Looking back on everything, I understood the real lesson. Karma doesn't always announce itself loudly. It doesn't always deliver punishment in obvious ways. Sometimes it whispers quietly, letting people make their own choices, and then simply watches as the consequences unfold. Those who sought to take what wasn't theirs had done so with confidence, but the results were clear. They had lost everything they tried to claim, and I had gained more than just money. I had gained clarity, strength, and freedom. I smiled, thinking about the future and the people I could help. For the first time in years, I felt complete peace. I knew I had survived betrayal, protected myself, and come out stronger. And I knew that the quiet power of karma had played its part perfectly. As I looked forward, I whispered to myself, sometimes karma doesn't scream. It whispers, and watches everything fall into place.